everybody. We now have a well-known figure on our circuit, Mr. Tim Phillips. And Tim is Managing Director of eCigintelligence, the leading source of independent data for the e-cigarette and the vaping sectors globally, providing unbiased information to numerous leading international companies, together with government regulators such as the FDA and the UK government. He's also Managing Director of a sister publication, CBD Intel, which is a business intelligence service providing professional, independent marketing analysis and regulatory tracking for the global cannabis sectors. So Tim will be talking today about the changing consumer behaviors and the role of regulation in new nicotine products. So if you could take it away there, Tim.
Sure can. Thanks, John. Thanks for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Very nice to be here again. I hope you can see my slides. I got them up. Shout if you can't, but I'm hoping that everyone can. I've got quite a few slides today, and I'm going to run through them pretty fast. But as I said to John, I think they're going to be made available to everyone afterwards. And if not, please do email me. My details are at the end of the presentation. I can email to them to you directly. So as John said, eCigintelligence and Tobacco Intelligence, many of you will have heard of us in light of eCigintelligence. We launched Tobacco Intelligence at the start of last year, 2020, and it's looking at any products that are not vaping but are kind of new nicotine products. So particularly we're looking at heated tobacco and snus, which I will mention today. Yeah, there's the logo thing slightly mixes up. So this is an eCigintelligence slide. You'll see some Tobacco Intelligence slides as well. Well, I won't touch on this. We have been in the sector in vaping for over 7 years. We track over 100 jurisdictions on the legal side and about 50 on the market data side, particularly for vape. We provide our data to a number of different areas of the sector. So it's not just to industry. We're also providing our data to governments, NGOs, and so on. This is the agenda for today. So I'm going to talk about vape to start with, and particularly looking at some of the changes that are going on in consumer attitudes. I'm going to avoid talking about flavors because we talked in detail about that last week. But I will mention a little bit about flavors, but mostly it's just what's going on in vape in terms of this kind of really dynamic sector. It keeps moving. Every time we look at it, it's changed. So I'll talk about a few of the changes that have happened recently. Then I'm going to have less on heated tobacco and nicotine pouches, but I wanted to talk about it. Heated tobacco, I guess, looking at how the sector's growing. I think growing, really strongly at the moment, and quite interestingly, there are some signs that it's also starting to fragment in some ways. So I'll talk about that. Nicotine pouches. We've got a presentation later from Trigger from Swedish Match. I'm not going to go into too much detail there because I think he's, as market leader, he's got a lot of good information on consumers, but I'll talk a little bit about some of the themes around nicotine pouches. And then the last few slides I've got is detailing some results from a survey we did of European parliamentary MEPs earlier this year. And I think that's quite interesting in light of some of the issues to do with the TBD and European legislation that's coming through. All right, starting with vape anyway. So what's going on with vape? Well, one of the big things that's going on with consumer preferences is this move towards smaller systems. And I guess it was started, or at least popularized very much by Juul in the US with a closed pod system. But what we're seeing in terms of consumers' use of products, we're seeing real growth in pods, both open and closed systems. So rechargeable, refillable pods. And we're seeing the sort of the products become I guess the hardware itself is becoming much more advanced. Lots of kits, lots of new features coming through. But the defining feature of it really is very much the kind of small size, the convenience for consumers, and we're seeing that come through very clearly all around the world, actually, all markets. I posed this question at the bottom there, which came first, the pod or the nicotine salt? And it's a bit of a chicken and egg question. I don't propose to answer it, but I think, you know, both were very relevant in the growth of pods. So we've got the increasing capacity and strength of batteries in smaller sizes, which enabled pod products to produce the same kind of levels of vapor as the bigger open systems used to. So we've got that, but we've also got nicotine salts, which allows much higher nicotine concentrations to be used, and so I think the two went together very nicely to grow this segment. Some of the data to back that up. So on the left, this chart is from our consumer survey in the US. That is very clearly not a representative sample of users, but it's around 7,000 or 8,000 consumers in the US, mostly of open systems. But what you'll see here is a growing interest in refillable pods as a primary device. So predominantly this group that we survey every year are very much open tank system users, the typical open system tank that you can imagine, a box mod and so on. But actually, interestingly, we've seen really big growth in the number of responders that come back to us and say they're using a refillable pod as a primary device now. And then just on the right there, that chart is showing another feature that we're seeing in pods as well is that there was a time when they were very popular as a secondary device, and we saw their growth really focused on secondary device. So they were the sort of backup device that open system tank users were using, perhaps when they went out, more convenience and so on. What we're starting to see is that declining, and so the number of our respondents in that US survey that I mentioned just now that are saying they have a refillable pod as a secondary device is going down. Partly the reason is because the features of the refillable pod are getting better, and so actually they're replacing, we think, the original hardware that's being used. So the advanced tank is being replaced by refillable pods more and more. In a minute, let's go on to the next one. All right, what impact does that have on nicotine strength? This data is from our trackers. We now carry out trackers in the leading markets, the leading vape markets around the world, 7 of them, I think, at the moment. And we've tracked data in online retailers. So the leading online retailers, we track all the products that are sold. Now, the reason we do it, as I explained last week, we also do this for flavors, but the reason we collect all this masses of data, and there's now millions of points of data in this database. The reason is to try to understand what's going on, and because in this sector, we really struggle with getting proper sales data. No one really has sales data. But what's quite interesting about this approach is that it gives a very good proxy for what consumer demand is in the market, because it's showing what online retailers are selling and what they have in their stock. And what actually happens in the online world, although you might imagine that online retailers have an unlimited shelf space, they can put as many products as they like online. Of course, what in reality happens is that they've got very limited warehousing space, and therefore products that sell are kept on and products that don't sell are taken off the website. So that gives us a very good indication of how things are changing and how consumer tastes are changing. And anyway, what we're seeing in this chart on the left is the obvious increase in nicotine salts. So clearly nicotine salts are used with refillable pod devices, and you can see the growth in that light blue bar in the chart on the left there. So as time has gone on, nicotine salts have become a more and more important part of the market. What's quite interesting, though, is if you start to look within a category of these products. So if you just look at nicotine salts in the US, the nicotine strength is actually coming down over time, and you can see that on the right-hand side. And so sorry, I'm just going to try and get rid of that. What's clear is that the nicotine strength that consumers are using, or certainly what is being offered to them, which suggests is what they're demanding from retailers, is declining because the performance of the devices that they're using it in is going up. So effectively battery performance and the actual performance of the devices themselves, in this case pod devices, is improving. So we're seeing a declining nicotine concentration. I think quite interesting and very counterintuitive to perhaps some of the media discussion about nicotine that's going on in the US at the moment. Okay, next slide. Ooh, wait a minute, we've jumped a whole load of slides. Okay, here's a slide on nicotine as well. Again, this comes from our nicotine trackers around the world, and you can see on the left there, those 7 lines are showing what's going on with average nicotine strengths in all products. So this is including nicotine salts and free-base nicotine. What's very clear here is that we are seeing a big distinction between countries where there is a nicotine cap in place, and so all the countries that you can see leading up to this one, so all the European countries plus Russia, which have a nicotine cap of 20 milligrams per milliliter, you can see what the impact is on the average nicotine concentration in the market. These are all certainly below the ones at the top. The ones at the top are Canada and the US, and even as we know, Canada is looking at potentially bringing in a nicotine cap. The nicotine concentration anyway is lower than we're getting in the US. And really just going back over what I was saying previously, if you look at nicotine strengths in the US, you can see this big growth in high strength nicotine products. So everything over 20 milligrams is in these dark blue lines, and you can see the growth between 2018 and 2020. Okay, we've talked about this one. I'm going to talk now a little bit about regulation and the impact it has, and what impact does that regulation have on the products in the market. I think this is just quite interesting. Again, this is taken from our tracker, and the top chart is looking at 2 big drops in the number of products in a particular category. In this case, the pre-filled pods category, so closed system pods. How many were being offered by retailers in the US? And I'm only talking about the US because it's a very clear correlation between announcements by the FDA and a decline in the number of products. So you can see here between Q4 2018, end of 2018 and early 2019, we see a massive decline in the pods, a first decline. And that was because the FDA at that point announced that it was looking at a policy to restrict flavors and basically ban flavors other than tobacco menthol. If you look in the chart underneath it as well, and I'll just use my pointer here, quite interestingly, this correlates as well with a big change in the flavor profile for those pods. So between Q4 2018, where you can see that tobacco, which is the dark blue at the bottom, and cooling, which is what we're effectively calling menthol here, that was that's probably a third of the market before the FDA's announcement. And then in Q1 2019, I think we took the data roughly in the middle of that quarter. The impact of the FDA announcement at the end of 2018 can already be felt. We see a massive jump in tobacco and menthol flavors, and we see a big decline in the number of products. And again, same pattern, even more extreme, I guess, in the early part of 2020, when we see the reaction of the market effectively to the announcement by the FDA. It was actually guidance, and it was more restricted, but it was looking at banning effectively or restricting flavored closed system pod products in retail, and you can see the impact here. So both in terms of the number of products being offered, but also the almost entire sort of reduction of any other flavors other than the tobacco and menthol. Final slide on vape that I think quite interesting is to really look at the way that obviously a lot of the data we've just shown has been about consumers. This is about retailers. So this is data taken from our vape store survey. We do that every year in the US as well. We do it in many of the key markets, but I think that the data from the US is very interesting in terms of just seeing how the owners of vape stores are seeing things. And no surprise, they react very much to what's going on the regulatory side. So you can see, 2016 and 2017, there's a mixture of views around optimism and pessimism. So pessimism down at the bottom, optimism at the top here. You can see a massive drop between the FDA announcement about regulation and post the announcement. So a big drop there. Then it crept back up as the FDA PMTA deadline was pushed out, and then you can see it's dropped right back down now. So a big majority of vape store owners are somewhat or very pessimistic about the status of the industry, really reflecting the start of the PMTA process, and now of course the PMTA deadline which has been passed. So I think we'll see equivalent data coming out for this year, and effectively the vape stores are relatively negative about regulation, as you would expect, but that does have a big impact on how many vape stores continue to operate and how many consumers get access to products in this way. Good. I'm going to talk about heated tobacco. I'm really running out of time. Wow. Okay. Heated tobacco. So the main story about heated tobacco, I think, is compared to, let's say, 2 years ago, this is a sector that has taken off. A lot of analysts and industry investment managers and analysts and so on are surprised at how this has moved from being an Asian phenomenon to something that is now rolling out really successfully in a load of markets. And you can see that from this chart. So Japan and South Korea was really the only two markets that heated tobacco was working in a number of years ago, as you can see from this dark brown line back in 2016. And you can just see how this is creeping into Europe and rest of the world. So we're starting to see markets really take off. Interestingly, I think an area to look at here is how do we see these heated tobacco markets interacting with vape markets? And although it's too early to say, I think it's probably going to be the case that the markets work quite well together. In other words, heated tobacco is not cannibalizing vape sales. They're actually boosting it to the detriment of combustible cigarettes. We've seen that certainly in some anecdotal evidence from Greece, and we're starting to see it in some other markets. So markets where heated tobacco and consumers, heated tobacco is working, consumers are starting to use the product. What seems to be happening is that consumers are really being offered and being given the opportunity to do something that is not smoke a cigarette. And that often is beneficial to things like vape, and I think as we come on to it, it'll probably be beneficial for nicotine pouches as well. Another interesting sort of aspect of heated tobacco, this has always been considered very much the preserve of the incumbent tobacco industry, and it very much still is. There's no change to that. I think what's starting to happen that we're picking up that's rather interesting is a huge rush of manufacturers, many of them Chinese manufacturers who were in the vape space. They're now producing compatible hardware products that are going into a few of the markets, and we've just picked out 3 here: Japan, South Korea, and Russia. So markets where heated tobacco has got a much higher penetration rate than perhaps some others, and it's been around for longer. We're seeing a lot of compatible products come into the market, and you can see this growth here. Now, these numbers in the chart here are actually showing the number of hardware products plus compatible consumables. Most of the consumables, i.e. the heat sticks, are actually made of tea. They're not made of tobacco. But I think it's quite interesting that we're seeing a number of those pop up in the market, and you can see the direction of flow here, particularly in Japan. Less so in South Korea and Russia. And I think the point to make about that is that there is certainly some quite big efforts going into stopping compatible products and protecting IP rights. So quite rightly, a lot of tobacco companies are trying to exert their rights over these products. Nicotine pouches, not a huge amount to say. As I said, I think the issue here is whether nicotine pouches are going to disrupt existing kind of oral tobacco markets in the same way that vape has disrupted cigarettes. We're seeing, I think, some interesting patterns come through here. Certainly in Sweden, there's some evidence to suggest that nicotine pouch is basically replacing snus quite nicely. You can see that in the top chart. And of course, it's quite interesting to look at snus users in Sweden anyway, just to see how, the usage is very similar to cigarettes in the sense that it's a daily activity and it's normally solus. So people who use snus tend to use it in a solus way. Right, I'm going to move straight on. I don't think there's lots to say about regulation of nicotine pouches. It's really happening. We're seeing, Germany has recently banned nicotine pouches. We've got Czech Republic has just announced, I think this week, that they're starting to regulate the pouches. We've got some regulation coming through in other markets. So it's a really movable sector. All right, MEP survey, just to really pile through this. We carried out a survey of MEPs at the start of this year. The reason we did it was that, as you all know, and Dustin Darman talked about yesterday, we've got lots of European legislation coming through. Not only the Tobacco Products Directive, but also the Tax Directive and various other initiatives that are going to really define policy around these new nicotine products over the next few years. So it's a really important time for regulation in the sector. What happened, as many of you will remember, is that the Tobacco Products Directive 2, the one that's in place right now, had a huge amount of policy direction exerted by the European Parliament. They were absolutely essential, in effect, in changing the way that that vaping products were regulated. And so we think that MEPs really have a big job to play, a big role to play in upcoming regulations on a European level. So that's why we did the survey. It was, I have to admit, it was a very difficult survey to do because MEPs were mostly not in Brussels. It was very difficult to get hold of them. But we got 32 to answer, which is around 5% of the Parliament. It doesn't sound like very many, and we'd definitely like to do another one later this year and get some more respondents, but I think it gives us a good indication of what's going on. And here are some slides to show that. So this first slide is just showing about awareness. So how many MEPs really understand the product? They're going to be asked to make policy and vote on really key policy decisions in the future. How many of them understand these products? And not surprisingly, there's quite a large chunk of MEPs that really have no knowledge about the products at all. They have more knowledge about vapor than they do about nicotine pouches. Again, no surprise here, but if you split up the ones that have or tell us that they had some knowledge about products, compare them to those that said they didn't have any knowledge, clearly the ones that had knowledge were very much more positive about new nicotine and the risk of those products in the market. So that's clearly the difference between the two sides of this chart. MEPs that have no knowledge are much more likely to not know what they think about the risk of these products, and they tend to be much more negative. And I guess that's not a surprise.
We've got about 1 minute left, if you could.
Yeah, I'm sorry, John. That's right. All right, 2 more slides. So will nicotine products help smokers quit or encourage them to start smoking? This kind of off-ramp versus on-ramp that is always talked about in the US. Quite interestingly, so a majority of MEPs think that they offer a way to quit, and that's most positive for vapor, but also the number of MEPs that think that vapor might lead to smoking is much higher than others. So nicotine pouches, in a way, although MEPs tend to know much less about it, they tend to think that these products are more benign, and that's quite an interesting result, I think. 2 more, right, risk assessment. So are new nicotine products less harmful than conventional cigarettes? Interestingly, these results, if you compare them to the Eurobarometer study from earlier this year, these are actually, MEPs tend to be more positive about these products than the general public, which is a good thing. But you can see here that there's still a chunk of MEPs that think that they are just as harmful or more harmful than smoking. So that's really quite negative. And then final, I guess the crucial question really, like what do MEPs think about regulating these products? Well, interestingly, 3/4 of them think that online sales should be allowed. But the position is much worse for flavors and advertising, as you can see on the left. that's it. Those are my details. If you want to get in touch, please do. And as I said, I can send you these slides if you send me an email. Thanks, John. Sorry it took so long.
No, Tim, thank you very much. And we are unfortunately out of time. As Tim said, we will be sharing out the presentation, or you can contact him directly. Tim, thank you for your time. And unfortunately, we didn't have time for questions this time.
All right. Do you send them through by email if you've got any? Yeah.
We can do, not a problem.
All right.
All right, Tim, thank you.
Bye.